The strange part wasn't that Nora called me at 10:30 on a Thursday. She called me all the time. The strange part was what she said when I answered. "Are you busy?" she asked, voice low and tight in a way I didn't like. I was already reaching for my keys. "Where are you?" There was a beat of silence, then, "At Savoy on 9th. Another pause. "And I would deeply appreciate it if you'd come pretend my car won't start so I can leave." That made me stand up straight. Bad date? The kind people should have to register somewhere, yes. I was out the door before she finished the sentence. Her name was Nora Bennett, and for the last 6 years, she had been one of the most fixed parts of my life. We met through mutual friends at a summer birthday party, argued for 20 minutes about whether people who said they didn't like music should be trusted, and somehow never really stopped talking after that. Over the years, she became the person I called first when something good happened. The person who knew which Chinese place I swore was better than the others. The person who could tell from one text whether I was fine or just acting like a man about it. We weren't dating. We had never dated. And somewhere in the last 2 years, that had become inconvenient. Not dramatic, not tortured, just inconvenient in the way it's inconvenient when one person starts mattering more than the category you put them in. I didn't do anything with that. Partly because I liked having Nora in my life too much to risk making it weird. Partly because she dated enough other people over the years to make maybe she feels the same seem like a dangerous hobby. So I stayed where I belonged. Best friend. Reliable. Safe. The man she called when she needed an emergency exit from a terrible date. By the time I pulled up outside Savoy, it was raining hard enough to blur the lights along the street. Nora came out of the restaurant 2 minutes later, one hand holding her heels, the other clutching her purse, looking annoyed in a way that made her somehow even prettier. She slid into the passenger seat and shut the door with a sigh. Go. Before he follows me out and starts talking about crypto again. I pulled away immediately. That bad? She leaned her head back against the seat. He said the phrase mindset wealth 3 separate times. I winced. Unforgivable. Thank you. You're welcome. That got a laugh out of her, which was good. I liked hearing that sound after tension. It always felt like the room, or the car in this case, had survived something. Nora tucked one leg under herself and looked over at me. You didn't have plans? Just leftovers and a deeply unserious documentary. That sounds nice. It was going to be. She smiled faintly and then looked out at the rain. For a minute, the car went quiet except for the wipers and the soft hum of the road. I should have just driven her home and left it there. Instead, because apparently I enjoy making my own life harder, I said, how'd the date even happen? Clara set it up, she said. Ah, a crime of optimism. She swore he was smart. Was he? He was loud. That's not the same. I noticed. Another smile, smaller this time. Then it faded. I glanced at her at the next light. You okay? Yeah. She rested her elbow near the window. Just tired. That answer wasn't quite right. I knew because I knew her. Nora got sarcastic when she was just tired. She got quiet when something was bothering her for real. Was it only the date? I asked. She hesitated. Then, not exactly. The light turned green. I drove another block before asking, Want to tell me? She looked at me for a second, then away again. Maybe not while you're operating a vehicle. That feels promising. It's not. But she smiled a little when she said it. We reached her building 10 minutes later. I pulled over under the awning, and for one strange second, neither of us moved. Nora looked at me like she wanted to say something, then she didn't. Instead, she touched my forearm once, lightly, and said, Thanks for coming to get me. Always. Something changed in her face at that. Not big. Just enough that I noticed it. Then she opened the door, slipped out into the rain, and hurried toward the front entrance. I sat there for a second, watching to make sure she got inside. That was when my dashboard lit up. Nora's phone connected. I frowned. Her phone did that sometimes when she was still close to the car. Usually it disconnected a few seconds later. Then the speakers crackled. A woman's voice filled the car. Okay, first of all, if you bailed on that date because you were thinking about Liam again, I'm proud of you. I froze. Clara, Nora's best friend. The voice note kept playing through my speakers before I could even reach for the screen. And second, I am begging you to stop acting like this is a mystery. You've been in love with him forever. You call him for everything. You compare every guy to him. And tonight you looked physically ill when he mentioned that woman from work asking him out. If you don't tell him soon, that is on you, Nora. My hand stopped halfway to the console. The rain thudded against the windshield. The voice note kept going. For the record, no one asks the same man to rescue her from every bad date unless she already knows he's the one she actually wants. The audio clicked off. Silence. Then a sharp knock on my passenger window. I turned. Nora was standing there in the rain again, eyes wide, breathing hard, staring at me through the glass like she already knew exactly what had just happened. When I lowered the window, she swallowed and asked, voice barely above a whisper, "Please tell me that didn't just play through your car?" I looked at Nora through the open window. Rain was catching in her hair, her blouse darkening at the shoulders. One hand still on the car door like she hadn't decided whether to flee or climb back in and manage the damage herself. There was no good answer, so I went with the honest one. It played. She closed her eyes. Not dramatically, just like she had reached the exact edge of her emotional budget for the evening and found out there were surprise fees. "Fantastic," she muttered. I unlocked the passenger door. "Get in before you drown." For 1 second, she just stared at me. Then she got back in. She shut the door, dropped her head back against the seat, and laughed once in that awful, helpless way people do when the humiliation is too specific for anger to carry alone. "I'm moving to another city," she said. "That feels extreme." "It feels underreactive." I waited. That was important. Because there's a version of this scene where I push too fast. Make it about the confession instead of the fact that she'd just had the inside of her chest blasted through my speakers without consent. So I let the silence breathe. Rain drummed overhead. The dashboard glowed softly. Nora sat twisted slightly away from me, staring out the windshield like she was trying to invent a cleaner universe. Finally, she said, "You're being very calm." "I'm trying." "That's suspicious." "I'm trying because if I stop trying, I'm going to say the first thing in my head, and I don't think that's fair to you yet." That made her turn toward me. Not fully, just enough. "What's the first thing in your head?" she asked. I smiled faintly. That doesn't feel like the right first topic. It might be better than whatever this is. "This," I said, "is me making sure you know I understand what just happened." Nora looked down at her hands. "And what do you understand?" she asked quietly. "That your friend talks too much." That got the smallest, unwilling breath of laughter out of her. Good. I kept going. And that what she said was not meant for me. Which means I'm not going to sit here and treat this like you handed me a speech on purpose. Her face changed at that, softened. Not because the tension left, because some of the panic did. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome." A pause. Then, because apparently tonight was committed to honesty with poor timing, she said, "But she also wasn't wrong." Well, there it was. Clean, flat, impossible to mishear. I looked at her, really looked, at the embarrassment still fighting with relief in her face, at the fact that she had chosen the truth after already surviving enough for one evening. "Nora," she let out a breath. "I know. I know this is terrible." "No," I said softly. "I don't think terrible is the word. That's because you're not the one who just accidentally broadcast your emotional life through a Honda." That was fair. I nodded once. Strong point. She folded one leg under herself on the seat, the way she always did when she got tired enough to stop pretending posture mattered. "You want to know the worst part?" "Probably not, but yes. The worst part is that I heard the first line of that voice note before I got out of the car and still thought maybe it wouldn't connect." She covered her eyes with one hand. That is the kind of optimism people should be institutionalized for. I laughed before I could stop myself. Nora dropped her hand and pointed at me. "You are not allowed to enjoy this." "I'm not enjoying it. You look a little like you are." I look like a man who just found out his entire romantic history may have been a procedural delay. That got her. A real laugh this time. Short, embarrassed, but real. Then it faded, because the real question was still there. She looked at me for a long second and then asked the one thing I think she'd been afraid to hear from the start. Do you want me to explain it? The answer came quickly. Yes, I said. Then, more gently, but only if you want to. Nora stared at the rain-streaked windshield for a beat. Then she nodded. I compare people to you, she said. Not in some weird checklist way, just… She searched for it. Every time I go out with someone, eventually there's a point where I think, this would be easier with Liam, or funnier, or less lonely. My whole chest tightened. She kept going because apparently once the truth cracked open, she was too exhausted to start repairing the wall. You're who I call when something goes wrong. You're who I want to tell things to first. And every time I tried to convince myself that was just friendship and I should date like a normal person, some man would say something tedious over cocktails and I'd think, I could be in Liam's car right now making fun of this. I looked down once, then back at her. Nora. She gave me one helpless little smile. See? Even now, disaster. And I still somehow ended up exactly there. That sentence landed deep. Because she was right. She had. And maybe so had I, more times than I wanted to admit. I rested my hand on the steering wheel so I wouldn't do something reckless with it and asked, carefully, do you want my very honest answer now? Nora's eyes lifted to mine. She swallowed once. Then she said, barely above a whisper, yeah. I held her gaze and said the one thing there was no point hiding anymore. I think I've been waiting way too long to hear that. Her face changed all at once. Not relief. Something brighter. More dangerous. Like hope had finally found a door and was deciding whether to walk through it. Nora held my gaze like she wasn't sure whether to trust what she'd just heard. I think you've been waiting, she repeated slowly. I nodded. There didn't seem to be any point pretending I'd meant something safer. Yes. The rain softened against the roof of the car, not gone, just quieter now, and the whole space between us changed shape. Nora looked down at her lap, then back up at me. Since when? That was, unfortunately, a real question. And maybe the only reason I answered it honestly was because the night had already burned through the polite versions of both of us. Long enough to be inconvenient, I said. Not so long that I can claim wisdom about it. A small breath of laughter escaped her. That's very you. It's also true. She studied my face for a second, searching for the joke I wasn't making. When she didn't find one, her expression shifted. Not dramatically, just into something more open than she usually let herself be with me. I thought maybe I'd imagined it sometimes, she admitted. Little things. The way you'd go quiet when I mentioned a date. The way you'd remember details no one else remembered. I did go quiet. I noticed. I gave her a look. Apparently not enough to stop dating men who say mindset wealth. That got a laugh out of her. Good. The car needed that. Then Nora tucked a damp strand of hair behind her ear and said, quieter now. Do you know what pushed me over the edge tonight? The crypto? That too. A pause. But really? He asked if I'd ever been in love. I stayed still. And I said yes before I could stop myself. That landed deep. What did he say? He asked what happened. She gave one helpless shrug. And I realized I was sitting across from a stranger trying to explain a feeling I hadn't even fully admitted to the person it belonged to. My chest tightened hard enough to be annoying. Nora looked out at the rain-streaked windshield again. That's when I texted Clara from the bathroom, then I called you. I let that sit for a second. Then I asked the question that had been building since the voice note. What woman from work? She blinked, then groaned softly and covered her face with one hand. Oh no! That is not a reassuring response. It's not bad, she said through her fingers. It's just humiliating in a completely different direction. Nora. She dropped her hand and looked at me. 3 weeks ago, Sophie mentioned that some woman at your office had asked if you were seeing anyone. I frowned. Sophie talks too much too. Apparently that's the theme tonight. She asked me to coffee once, I said. It wasn't a thing. Nora stared at me. It wasn't? No. You didn't go? I went downstairs, realized in about 7 seconds she meant it as a date, and told her I didn't want to mislead her. The silence that followed was absurdly loud. Nora's mouth parted a little. Why? I looked at her, really looked, at the rain in her hair, at the embarrassment still lingering in her face, at the fact that neither of us had any real cover left now. Do you genuinely need that explained? Her face changed all at once. The kind of change that starts in the eyes. Hope, disbelief, something almost shy, which on Nora looked so rare it nearly undid me. No, she said softly. I guess I don't. Neither of us moved after that. The car had become too small for pretending and too private for escape. Then Nora asked, "Why didn't you ever say anything?" There it was. The question that lives underneath half the stories people tell themselves about timing. I leaned back against the seat and let out a breath. Because I liked my life with you in it. She frowned a little. That doesn't answer it. It does. I looked over at her. I didn't want to risk losing the version of us I already had just because I wanted more. That stilled her. I kept going because if I stopped now, I'd regret sanding it down. You're my first call too, Nora. You're the person I want around when things are good and when they're terrible. And every time I thought about saying something, I pictured making you uncomfortable or making you feel like you had to choose between honesty and keeping me. So I stayed quiet. Nora's eyes held mine, bright and unguarded now. That is unbelievably annoying, she whispered. I smiled faintly. Yeah? Yes? Because that is almost exactly why I stayed quiet too. Well, that felt both satisfying and like grounds for a formal complaint. I laughed once under my breath. We're not a very efficient pair. Painfully inefficient. A beat passed, then another, and then Nora said the one thing that took all the air out of the car. I don't want to keep doing this wrong. I turned toward her fully. Then we don't. Her breathing caught slightly, and I knew that if I wasn't careful, I could rush this into something that felt good tonight and messy tomorrow. So I kept my voice gentle. But I also don't want our first honest conversation about this to happen, because your friend accidentally detonated your phone in my car. That made her smile even through the nerves. Oh, that's fair. I want this on purpose. Nora looked at me for a long second, then she nodded once. Okay, 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 she repeated, on purpose. I don't know if it was the way she said it or the fact that all night had been steering toward this exact place, but something inside me settled. Not because everything was solved, because for the first time, it felt like we were finally standing on the same side of it. Nora glanced down at the console, then back at me. For what it's worth, Clara is never being allowed near Bluetooth again. That seems wise. And if you ever mention this voice note to anyone, I'll lie and say you cried. That's vicious. I'm feeling vulnerable. It sharpens me. I laughed, and she did too, and the sound of it together after everything else felt so good it almost made me reckless. Almost. Then she went quiet again. Not bad quiet, the kind that comes right before something important. Her fingers tightened around her purse strap, and she asked very softly, "If we do this on purpose?" I waited. Nora's eyes lifted to mine. "Would you kiss me now?" she whispered. "Or make me wait until tomorrow?" I looked at her, at the rain still clinging to her hair, at the embarrassment she'd survived, the honesty she'd chosen anyway, and the fact that for the first time in 6 years, neither of us was pretending we needed another language for what this was. Then I said, "I'd kiss you now." Nora's breath caught. I added, "But only if tomorrow still gets to exist." Something softened in her face so quickly it almost hurt to watch. "It exists," she said softly. "I want it to." That was all I needed. I leaned in slowly, enough to give her time to stop me. Enough that this still felt like a choice and not a consequence of rain, bad dates, or one catastrophic voice note. She met me halfway. The kiss wasn't rushed. It wasn't dramatic. It felt like the answer to a question both of us had been asking in quieter ways for years. Warm, a little stunned, and somehow more familiar than surprising, like my whole life had already been leaning in her direction and had finally run out of reasons not to. When we pulled back, Nora stayed close enough that our foreheads almost touched. "Well," she whispered, "that seems to be the theme tonight." A laugh slipped out of her. "You are taking this suspiciously well." "I'm not taking it well, I'm taking it carefully." "That," she said, still too close, "is one of the reasons I compare everyone to you." I smiled. "Good. I'd hate to lose my lead now." She laughed again, then looked down once, collecting herself. "So what's the on-purpose version?" "Tomorrow," I said, "I pick you up. We go somewhere that doesn't involve emotional damage, tequila, or Bluetooth betrayal. You tell Clara she's banned from voice notes for a week." "A month." "Fair." "And this counts as what?" Nora asked. I looked at her. "A very strong preview." That got me a look and another quick kiss, shorter this time, like she was confirming it still felt real. It did. I walked her upstairs after that, mostly because I didn't trust the universe not to invent one more complication in the lobby. Outside her apartment door, she turned to me with her keys in hand and said, "If I wake up tomorrow and this feels fake, I'm going to be furious." "It won't. You sound very sure." "I am." She studied my face for a second, then nodded once like she was letting herself believe me completely for the first time all night. "Okay," she said. "Then tomorrow." "Tomorrow." She went inside smiling. I stood in the hallway for a second longer than necessary, then went back to my car and sat there laughing quietly to myself because 6 years of self-control had just been detonated by one terrible date and a friend with no respect for audio privacy. The next night, I picked Nora up at 7. No rain, no rescue, no crypto. Just dinner at a little Italian place by the river and the deeply strange, wonderful experience of not having to translate what we were doing into something safer. She looked calmer. I probably looked happier than a man should on a second date that was technically also a first. Halfway through dinner, she said, "This is so much better than all the other ones." And I told her that was an insulting low bar. 3 weeks later, Clara still referred to herself as the patron saint of accidental confessions. Nora threatened her daily. I kept winning. Not because I deserved it, but because this time I didn't have to compete with anyone else. I was finally just where I'd wanted to be all along. Across from Nora, hearing about her day, reaching for her hand without having to pretend it was an accident. And the strangest part was that nothing about it felt sudden. It felt named. What would you have done if your best friend stepped out of your car, left the Bluetooth on, and her friend's audio exposed everything? And have you ever gone through something like that, where one accidental moment said what nobody had been brave enough to say out loud? Tell me your story in the comments. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.